Something is developing inside the Las Vegas Raiders facility right now that I think every serious fan of this team needs. Best draft in the entire NFL. Fernando Mendoza is about the single most consequential decision of the entire 2026 season, who starts at quarterback when the one and commit to him for at least the first 5 games of the season. That is the head coach's position. The man hired specifically to develop this quarterback, the man who constructed his entire offensive philosophy around bringing a young signal caller along the right way. He wants to give Mendoza the full organizational backing of a real starter from opening week. That is exactly the right instinct. That is precisely what you hire a coach like Kubiak to deliver. But Mark Davis, according to what's coming out of the building, sees it differently. Davis apparently wants Kirk Cousins to start the first 5 games, establish some wins on the board, create early season stability, and then transition to Mendoza once momentum has been built. On the surface, if you're not thinking through the full downstream consequences of that approach, the argument has a certain appealing logic. Cousins knows the system. He's experienced. He's less likely to cost the team a game with a back-breaking interception at a critical moment. Why not use that stability while the young quarterback watches and absorbs? Here's why not. And I want to work through this carefully because it deserves more than a surface-level response. The moment Kirk Cousins takes that field as the starter for Game 1, you have changed what this year is fundamentally supposed to accomplish. You have shifted the organizational purpose of 2026 from developing your franchise quarterback to winning football games with a 37-year-old bridge option. And those two objectives are not compatible. They cannot coexist cleanly because the moment Cousins goes out in Week 2 and orchestrates a winning drive, the conversation changes permanently. Suddenly, the question isn't when does Mendoza take over? It's why would we fix something that isn't broken? Suddenly, the fan base splits. Suddenly, there are voices inside and outside that building asking whether Mendoza is actually ready. And now Kubiak is in an impossible position, pulling a quarterback who has been winning in favor of a rookie, which is one of the hardest calls any head coach can make because the media narrative writes itself the moment that rookie has one difficult afternoon, one interception, one stalled drive, one moment where the game gets away from him, and everyone says the same thing. See, he wasn't ready. Why did they pull Cousins? This is not a hypothetical scenario I'm constructing. We have watched this exact dynamic play out before, in different cities with different names attached. The veteran performs well enough to make the transition genuinely uncomfortable. The rookie gets inserted into a situation where any mistake is magnified because he replaced someone who was producing. The development timeline gets disrupted in ways that don't immediately look like disruption, but compound across weeks and months into something that can't be undone in a single offseason. What was supposed to be a foundational year for the franchise's future quarterback turns into an organizational identity crisis that helps nobody, least of all the player the organization spent the first overall pick acquiring. I want to bring Cleveland into this conversation directly because the parallel is too important to ignore. The Browns drafted Shedeur Sanders with genuine organizational optimism and real talent on both sides of the equation. They had a young quarterback with a real skill set and a legitimate future in professional football, and instead of committing to him fully, giving him the clean developmental runway he needed, accepting that the early weeks might be difficult, building the organizational clarity that young quarterbacks require to actually develop. They hesitated. They kept one foot in the veteran option and one foot in the young quarterback transition. That split commitment poisoned the entire environment before it had a chance to produce anything. The season that followed wasn't just lost, it was wasted. There's a distinction between those two things that matters enormously. You can lose games while building something real and meaningful. What Cleveland did was lose games while building nothing. Shedeur didn't get the developmental environment he needed. The team didn't get the directional clarity it needed. Everyone walked out of that season with less than they started with. That is the specific outcome the Raiders are staring at if Davis overrules Kubiak on this decision. Now here's where I want to push further, because even within the disagreement being reported, I think both sides may be working with the wrong time frame. Kubiak wants 5 games for Mendoza. Davis wants Cousins for 5 games and then the transition. My honest position is that neither of those approaches is aggressive enough in its commitment to the franchise's actual future. If you're going to trust Fernando Mendoza, and you should completely and without reservation, then trust him for at least 10 games, a minimum of 10 real starts before you draw any meaningful conclusions about where this is heading. And let me explain specifically why 10 games is the floor rather than a conservative preference. The NFL is a game of adjustments. and the adjustment cycle operates on a timeline that first-time starters cannot compress no matter how talented they are. Every young quarterback in the league's history has encountered an early stretch where defenses are showing him coverages and disguises he hasn't seen before, where the processing speed required to function at a high level is genuinely different from anything the college game demanded, where the mental load of pre-snap identification and post-snap confirmation happening simultaneously in real time feels overwhelming in ways that film study can't fully prepare for. The quarterbacks who develop into franchise-level players are not the ones who avoid that wall. They all hit it. The ones who become great are the ones who hit that wall, work through the difficulty with the full organizational support behind them, and emerge on the other side with a fundamentally deeper understanding of the professional game. That process does not happen in 5 games. It barely begins in 5 games. You need 10, ideally more, to see what a young quarterback actually looks like when the growing pains start giving way to real professional competence. Patrick Mahomes did not look like Patrick Mahomes in his first 5 NFL starts. Josh Allen's first extended run as a starter had people genuinely and publicly questioning whether he was a franchise quarterback at all. Lamar Jackson's early development required an organization that committed to him, absorbed the external skepticism, and gave him the room and time to figure out what he was becoming. Every single one of those quarterbacks needed real time, meaningful time, not a 5-game audition, before the player they were going to be started consistently emerging from the player they were in the moment. Fernando Mendoza deserves that same commitment, not as a courtesy or a preference, but as the actual mechanism by which franchise quarterbacks get built. What the conversation around this decision often misses is what the absence of that commitment does to the quarterback himself. Football is a mental game as much as it is a physical one, and a young quarterback's confidence is one of the most fragile and most consequential things in professional sports. When Mendoza walks into that facility knowing his head coach fully believes in him, that the roster was constructed around giving him the best possible conditions to develop, that the entire organization is aligned behind his growth, he plays differently. He plays with freedom. He takes his shots when they're there. He processes faster because he isn't carrying the weight of organizational doubt pressing down on every decision. Now imagine the alternative. Mendoza walks into that facility knowing the owner wanted to start the veteran, that his opportunity is conditional on surviving a 5-game evaluation window, that there are powerful people in that building who aren't fully sold on him yet. That doubt does not stay in the front office. It travels through a building in ways invisible to outsiders but completely legible to the players inside. Young quarterbacks have antennas for organizational uncertainty that are more sensitive than most people understand. A quarterback playing with that kind of ambient doubt is a quarterback who hesitates when he should pull the trigger, who checks down when the shot is there, who plays not to lose instead of playing to win. You cannot develop a franchise quarterback in that environment. The Kubiak dimension of this deserves specific attention because it's crucial to understanding what's actually at stake beyond just the quarterback decision itself. The Raiders did not hire Clint Kubiak to manage Kirk Cousins through a transitional season. They hired him because of his specific, demonstrated ability to develop a young quarterback within a sophisticated offensive system built around that quarterback's strengths. That is his professional value proposition to this organization. That is the reason the hire made sense. If Mark Davis overrules him on the most important quarterback decision of the year before the first game has been played, he has undermined the entire foundation of that hiring decision. He has communicated to Kubiak and to every coach who might want to build something in Las Vegas in the future, that head coach authority in this building has a ceiling that ownership can lower at any moment. That message does not stay contained in whatever room the conversation happens in. It echoes through the organizational culture and shapes how everyone understands the real power structure. Strong organizations hire the right people, give them genuine authority over their areas of expertise, and hold them accountable for results. If Davis believes Kubiak was the right hire, and hiring him suggests he does, then he needs to let Kubiak do what he was hired to do. None of this is about disrespecting what Kirk Cousins brings to this roster, and I want to be explicit about that. He is a legitimate NFL quarterback. His experience with Kubiak's system is genuinely valuable to the players learning it around him. His presence provides a stabilizing influence that veteran quarterbacks with his track record naturally create. Brock Bowers has spoken about how Cousins' familiarity with the offensive system has helped the entire group understand what high-level execution looks like. All of that is real and all of it matters, but there is a specific role that maximizes Cousins' value to this team and a specific role that wastes it. Starting him for the first 5 games while Mendoza waits is the one that wastes it. The role that makes Cousins genuinely valuable is mentor, system translator, daily demonstration of what elite execution in Kubiak's offense looks like, and insurance policy for scenarios nobody plans for, but every team must be prepared to handle. That is an incredibly valuable role. It requires professionalism and selflessness that not every veteran can genuinely embrace. But from everything reported about how Cousins has handled his situation since arriving in Las Vegas, he appears capable of that embrace. The organization just has to be honest with him about what the role actually is, rather than creating ambiguity about who the real quarterback of the future is supposed to be. Here is where I land, and I want to say it directly. Fernando Mendoza should start Game 1 of the 2026 season. He should start Game 5. He should start Game 10. He should start every game he's healthy enough to play unless his performance over a genuine sample, not a 5-game panic window, but a real 10-plus game stretch, provides actual evidence that something needs to change. That is the commitment this franchise needs to make to their franchise quarterback, to their head coach, and to the organizational vision they just spent an entire offseason and significant draft capital constructing. Anything less is a half measure, and half measures in quarterback development don't produce franchise quarterbacks. They produce wasted seasons, disrupted development timelines, and the same questions in the next offseason wearing different clothes. The Chiefs, the Bills, the Ravens all gave the NFL a blueprint for how this is done correctly. Commit to the young quarterback. Be patient when the early struggles arrive, because they will arrive. Accept that the road to a great quarterback runs through some uncomfortable early months, and when those moments come, respond by coaching your quarterback through them rather than reaching for the veteran who feels safer in the short term but costs you everything in the long run. The Raiders just put together one of the best draft classes in the entire NFL. They have a transformed secondary, a backfield pairing that creates genuinely unsolvable defensive problems, Brock Bowers healthy and engaged, and one of the most intelligent offensive systems in the league being installed by exactly the right coach for this moment. All of that talent, all of that organizational investment, all of that carefully constructed potential reaches its ceiling only if Fernando Mendoza is the quarterback who unlocks it. Kirk Cousins was never supposed to be the destination. Mendoza is. The fastest path to that destination is the straight one, not a 5-game detour that buys short-term comfort at the cost of long-term growth.